Hello, comic geeks, and welcome back to the Strange Saturday Super Show. This month, we are talking about No Holds Barred, a story of superheroics in iambic pentameter. The writer and creator here is Eric Gladstone. The line artist is Gabrielle M. Carey. The color artist is Inez Bravo, and the letter is Adita Bidikar. This came out through Behemoth, which I believe became Sumerian, which became Massive or something.
And there was Whatnot Publishing in there at some
In
point
the
as
yeah,
well.
which I only bring up so you know that you may have read books from this publisher, even if you don't recognize the name
Yeah, like
Behemoth,
Zorro.
like Zorro. Yeah, uh, but let's jump right into it because this is a bit of a wild tour de force. We are essentially following William Shakespeare as he lives through his own plays, kind
Yeah,
of.
that's
Yeah,
probably the best way
yeah,
to put it. I believe in this world he writes down his adventures or like the things that he
yeah.
beholds, and that's
I
how
think
he.
we are mid-career Shakespeare writer,
Yeah.
and so he's like gonna experience a couple things that then will clearly become the plays.
Yeah,
Uh,
but he says it several times, like, because the idea is that he's a superhero in this, by the
yes,
way, in case that's
uh,
not
yes.
like
To
his
just
cover
introduce it,
story
the
several times for like
bard
why
and the
he's going
page.
towards the dangerous thing is so that he can write about it. So I think
Yes,
he is the equivalent of your like Clark Kent journalist in this world.
yes.
Um,
Which on its face is deeply funny. There's a reason that when I was picking a book this week, I was like, okay, no, this sounds absurd and absolutely correct for the Strange Saturday Super Show.
yeah,
And it
I don't know if
certainly,
this was the
certainly
one you
was
were playing
strange.
around with a lot of stuff, but with one of them you're like, I gotta check if this is strange enough. I have no idea how you would have had to check if this was strange enough.
No, no, it was a different Shakespeare one. And it
Okay.
wasn't strange enough. That one's called Kill Shakespeare, I think. And it's
Okay.
just like essentially a drama of all of Shakespeare's characters coming together.
Gotcha.
Um,
But
But in any
yeah,
case, this is No Holds Barred, and we start off with Shakespeare experiencing some writer's block. We are introduced to the page, who is his sidekick, essentially his Robin, and we learn that the Queen of England has been stolen right off her own throne. We get our Batman-esque backstory where we see his kind of his tragic moment with a demon by the name of Puck who transformed his parents into donkeys, which set him on his, I guess quest for vengeance, kind of. This is
man.
like his kind of Batman origin story.
Yeah, yeah.
We get a quick bit of mystery solving in this first issue, and we're gonna be kind of jumping through a bit quickly because there's a lot going on.
Yeah, they're
Where
all like to some extent, while there's some threat, to some extent they are also like
they're pretty
single
one
story
shotty.
issues.
Yeah,
Yeah. So to try to summarize instead of like one long story, six individual stories is a lot more time consuming.
exactly. But we follow some classic mystery beats that come with a really fun kind of medievally middle age because not like not Victorian era, Elizabethan era flavor. Like they're following essentially a carrier pigeon to try to find out what's written on its leg, which is a really kind of funny twist on following a lead. We encounter an innkeeper who seems to have a sinister backstory going on. And as the bard is crawling upon the roof of this innkeeper's inn, he is betrayed by the innkeeper, who attempts to push him off and send him to his death. Which we learn is because he's been compelled by the demon Puck as well. But Shakespeare, of course, does not know that quite yet, the bard, rather. And with the sealed letter that he found within this ne'er do well's tunic, we find that the kidnapping of Queen Elizabeth is connected to the Queen's Guard. I'm sorry, the Queen's
Importantly,
Council.
though, he this innkeeper does end up dying himself
Yes,
after Shakespeare does attempt to like catch him as he's falling off the roof. But the innkeeper's a large man and
he
too heavy,
is.
and so he
Yeah.
plummets to his death.
Yeah, it's important that in our Batman analog with Shakespeare here, Shakespeare also has a no kill rule.
Yeah, and this is your pure what is it, killing Joker moment, where it's like, he falls into the, and you'll see how this is essentially, despite this being him dying, this is kind of his
Yes.
fallen acid moment.
Yes, yes. But we learn that the Queen's Council may be behind this because of a seal upon that letter, and they head to Westminster Abbey. It's kind of cute to like hit these touristy spots where it's like, oh, I know what that is. Oh, the like very iconic silhouettes of London that I think are really emblematic of the history of the city, and they add some cute little flavor to it. We encounter some very dumb guards who immediately let slip that it's Sir Francis Bacon who compelled them to not let anybody into Westminster Abbey. Luckily, the powers of the bard and the page combined are enough to take out these two guards, and they're able to get out of them that Bacon has taken bars. Sir Francis Bacon has taken Queen Elizabeth to the Globe so that he may frame Shakespeare for her murder via bear. Luckily, in again very Batman fashion, they have like uh equipment for everything. So as the bard frees Queen Elizabeth and starts to fight this bear, he sends, I almost just called him Robin, he sends Paige out to their Batmobile, which is a big carriage they've been driving around, to get a potion which they use to drench Sir Francis Bacon in bacon grease and sick the bear on him instead. Uh, Queen Elizabeth, luckily, is delighted by this, and Shakespeare's writer's block is cured, which is very nice. Uh, I think that this issue was the strongest of all six. This is a six-issue series. This is something where you can really tell that there was. This is where like the core of the idea came in for them.
So there's another issue that I think I enjoy a slight bit more, and I'll
Okay,
mention it when we get
I
there.
think I
But
have an
I
idea of
agree
which
with you.
one.
This is like, I think from a narrative perspective,
Mhm.
definitely the strongest. Like, it was clear there's a full picture here, and it very
Yes,
much works beat for beat.
it
Um,
really does. Uh, and it also really operates as a standalone book, which is really phenomenal. I think that something that's really important to talk about is the like form and function of this book, because it's clearly done with a lot of love for Shakespeare. Like we talked about when we've talked about Winnie the Pooh Demon Hunter, how sometimes people will grab, IPs or iconic things and put them into a weird situation just for, the clicks or curiosities. Whereas someone like Nick, and I think with a book like this, it's like, oh, they're doing this with like a real appreciation for
a
the
lot of like
source material,
Shakespeare lines
Mhm.
thrown in there. Everything's an iambic pentameter, which
Which is super
your
cool.
mileage may vary with depending on it, whether or not you enjoy reading Shakespeare.
I
Um,
think I wanted to talk about this after issue one because I think that it really is strong in a single issue. Like reading one issue of it,
Not made for like a bingeable format.
exactly.
Yeah.
But I think that there are also there's a lot of like Shakespeare style punnage going on that I
Yeah.
think is really great.
The
The attitude of a
thing
lot
for
of
me
characters.
that's weirdest about it is that like it feels random when sometimes they just decide to rhyme, and then other times it's just like iambic pentameter, and I'm like, I don't know
Yeah,
why
I
every now and then we have a couple rhyming lines that are
I
clearly intentional.
did I did get that because one thing, a lot of times Shakespeare would end his scenes or like really emphasize something with a rhyming couplet at the end, and I believe that was typically accompanied with oh geez, some sort of linguistic shift uh, with it. I won't worry about that right now, though. There's a specific term for it, and then it would end with a rhyming couplet, and it was like it's like iconically the way that a lot of Shakespeare ends, a lot of the way that a lot of scenes and acts end, and I feel like if there was I don't know, if there was a bit more intentionality with the rhyme, I think that it would have been really effective. But like you said, it does throughout the series feel a little tossed in. But I think that it
Feels like
was.
sometimes it'll start happening and then it happens like back to back a few times and then like it
Mhm.
just doesn't happen for an entire issue here and that it's very like it caught me off guard because like every now and then I notice it and then I'd be like, wait a minute, has it been rhyming? And I'd be like, no, it certainly has not been rhyming up until this point.
But I think that this first issue does a really good job with all of the form things that they have going on. I think that it's really strong in this first issue, which is super duper fun, and I quite enjoyed. Uh, but are we ready to move on to issue two, which is where we get more
Yep.
into the kind of series plot? Like issue one was very much like a one shot, which I think Jay you mentioned had gone on Kickstarter.
It's the exact same first issue, but a first issue of No Holds Barred that at least shared some pages, but done by different artists, multiple
Mhm.
artists, was on Kickstarter. I learned this after having read the book because
Yeah,
I start googling things after we read them very often,
which I
and
respect and
yeah, I found that
appreciate.
this was Kickstarter.
Yeah, I think that that makes a lot of sense.
I think it's
Issue
actually how
one
most
was.
of old like Behemoth and what before they
Mhm.
became massive. I think that's how most of the old Behemoth
That
slash
makes sense. I think that's
um
how a lot of
yeah
massive stuff works now,
yeah
right? Yeah.
yeah. I think they have
But
now like more they're doing a lot more like public domain stuff that's just like
mhm.
not Kickstarter first. But yeah, like even the early Sean Gordon Murphy stuff was all stuff off Kickstarter too. So
Which is where my knowledge comes from.
yeah,
But then we get to issue two, a family affair, wherein we see Shakespeare kind of in his civilian clothes doing his Shakespeare thing instead of his bard
did
thing.
enjoy this quite a bit. I liked the Shakespeare like director.
Yes, he is very angry about his actors because they are, in fact, uh, butchering his production of King Lear. Uh, there's a lot of good attitude in this first scene that I quite enjoyed, and we get a another kind of classic Shakespeare vibe with like kind of little trickster side characters doing a thing. So we have a couple of stagehands essentially who feel unappreciated by Shakespeare after he calls off an entire day of work out of frustration, and they want to find a way to get revenge on him. Which is when that big man innkeeper, Falstaff, from the first issue, comes back. He appears as a ghost or a devil of some sort, and he decides to help out these stagehands in their quest to bop Shakespeare. The page is having problems in his home life though, as his sister is slated to get married but has no husband picked. There are a couple of options here that you know, her mom is pushing for a Frenchman, her dad is pushing for an Englishman, uh,
The ghost.
and it's a very, I think, very well done kind of comedic run through where they're pitching these people. We also
Yeah.
see a mysterious woman who we know to be the wife of Falstaff, who seems to be hanging out and is good pals with the page's mother. Shakespeare gets bullied into agreeing to officiate this wedding, but before a groom can be decided, Shakespeare's crimometer, he has like a weird little technological thing. Uh, the only comes up this one time, um, but it tells him that crime is afoot. Uh, and they abscond before a husband can be picked. And in again a very Shakespearean move, the tricksters have like set themselves up. I can like so see this playing out on the stage where you've got the one who's pretending to be a victim, and then once the bard comes in and quote unquote saves them, they bop him on the head. Uh, which was their goal. But the rest of their plans is interrupted by the arrival of two oni masked women who absolutely slay. Uh, as audience members, we can pretty easily identify them as Paige's mom and Falstaff's wife. Falstaff's wife has like very iconic blue coloring in her hair and stuff. So like it's clearly not supposed to be a secret to us. Nothing in this book is really supposed to be like a grand reveal or anything. It's all pretty tongue in
No,
cheek.
it's not it's not going into that. It's
No,
very
no.
much like I get it in almost that theatrical way where it's like here's this like this character's wearing a different mask now, like you can tell as an
There's a
audience.
lot of it's a book that banks on a lot of dramatic irony, which I'll jump into uh, in a different issue because I have thoughts on it. But these masked Joni women, I think they end up calling themselves the wives of vengeance or something. Uh, they are
Take
here
your word
because
for it. I do not remember that
they say
specifically,
it
but
one time at the end of this issue, and
gotcha. I was like
yeah.
that definitely was not like a repeated thing because I don't remember that.
But they come in to attack the bard, which we can surmise as revenge for killing Falstaff.
Yeah.
But we get a sweet fight. The tricksters steal the invitation to the page's sister's wedding out of his pocket as the fight goes, and then the page is cornered. He's demasked, and he is saved. The it's Mrs. Someone, Falstaff's wife. She realizes that it's Paige and is like, okay, well, we can't kill them now because Paige is your son, so we're not gonna do that because we love our boy. Uh, they do their best to escape Paige and Bard after that, and more or less do so after throwing Paige and Bard into the river, which starts a running joke of Paige drowning like three adventures in a row. Um,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
they're
That's
pulled out of the,
that's
the river by a handsome savior, and they're fine. They're fine now.
they're chilling.
Yeah.
As
Falstaff
much as it can be
is
chilling when you're almost unconscious lying on a dock.
exactly. They're chilling. Here's the thing: they with all the love in the world, the stakes in this book don't feel that high. I never feel like the characters are going to die. No one ever feels like they're in mortal peril, which I think is intentional and part of the like kind of bouncy fun of the
Yeah.
book. Um, but our tricksters report to Falstaff about the wedding, which if Paige had an invite to, clearly they'll be able to get both Bard and Page and Shakespeare and his Page, who they want revenge on all of them because our
They need a lot
boy
of
our boy
revenge.
Falstaff wants revenge on Bard, and our tricksters want revenge on Shakespeare. So it all works. But Falstaff takes the form of Herne the Hunter. And he takes physical form with giant antlers and shit. It's pretty rad, if you ask me. And we come to
You
the
because what this
wedding.
book doesn't really do a
Mhm.
lot is those like big moment panels. It's a
Yeah.
lot more like um it's a lot more character, you know, again, I guess probably to emphasize the play thing, it's a
Mhm.
lot more like character dialogue, type sequentials than like we don't often get these big moments like we do when the hunter's crown are
Yes.
created,
Yeah.
which is
Which is a really cool moment.
which
I like this panel a lot, and I do
yeah,
wish that they had more of these because I think, like you're saying, it's a lot more of the kind of like beat panels as opposed to like a big beat. And I think a big part of that is because it's like it is a comedy comic, so it's a lot of kind of set up punchline type of panels. Um, and so when you get something like this that is also just like a rad visual, it's like, oh man, I kind of wish we had more of these because it does add like a fun juxtaposition. And even within that, we have one of the tricksters in the background making a little smarmy comment and making a silly face. So it's like you can still make these epic panels funny. So you can keep the tone of the book, but then use that like cool moment to emphasize the tone of the book.
also just breaks it up a little bit because I think
Hmm.
the every now and then we get kind of a more interesting penalty, but I think it's a very like samey feel page
Hmm.
to page a lot of the time.
Yeah, fully agree. So yeah, I think that this was a really, really rad panel. And then we cut to where the wedding supposedly will be happening once a husband is picked and William Shakespeare arrives to officiate, and the hunter has busted in. Along with his little lackeys, they tie up the page's dad. Oh, what is her name? The mother and Falstaff's wife. I feel bad that I keep calling it. Oh, her name is Alice. There we go.
There you
Paige's mother and Alice suit up essentially because they see that this is going on, and so they're going to come in and protect their families, but also hopefully kill Bard, but not Paige because he's their boy. Their plan is foiled as Bard, Page, and their mysterious savior from the river appear, and Page uses his smarts, which is kind of a common theme in this book, where they more outsmart their enemies as opposed to overpower them. And when the overpowering does happen, it's like one punch, which is a bit of a bummer. But we can
I
maybe get to
mean,
that with a later issue.
yeah, I think we'll
Yeah,
we'll
yeah,
get there.
yeah. But so using his abilities to deduce who these masked women were, Paige already is ready to convince them not to try to kill the bard. Our our ghost boy is taken out because he gets pretty much got by uh, the vengeful wives. They throw him into a cake. And this is where we learn that it was not, in fact, really Falstaff, but it was the demon Puck, who instead had kind of manipulated and mimicked this man so that he could go and fuck with Shakespeare. We get a again, it's weird that the little device pops up
I was
again.
gonna say, it actually does come back up
You're
here.
right, but only
Like
in
this
this
time,
issue.
but it's clear it's not just like a thing, because he's using it to like follow a tracking device.
Yeah. Which I will say, I did laugh out loud at the sight gag on this page, which is, in classic Batman fashion, the bard is like, I've affixed a tracking device to Puck after Puck escapes. And then we cut
His
to
duct
Puck
tape.
on a boat with like a massive radio duct taped to his back. And
Yeah.
like, okay, that was funny as hell. That
Yeah,
that made me fully laugh. Naturally, that sends our boys, the Bard and Page, on a mission. They are chasing after Puck. And that takes us to the end of issue 2, with the tease that we are going to the trouble with tempests. This begins with
This is my favorite gag of the book,
it's so funny.
which is the horse-drawn carriage, like as essentially a boat going through the water. It's again, it's like the Batmobile thing where it's like, oh, the Batmobile will transform and go through, but no, they're just in their horse-drawn carriage in the sea, and it is
It's
my
so
funny.
good.
It's my favorite gag in the book. I find it hilarious.
It's deeply funny. And in case you couldn't tell from the title of this one, it's the Tempest. They get stranded on an island, which is home to our. I don't think they ever fully name him, but it's clearly Caliban. Our dear creepy fishman again. Poor Paige almost drowns. They find themselves marooned, and they are seduced into learning magics.
I did also find the goofing around with the skeleton's skull in the Hamlet sets very funny as well.
That is so fair.
That was because there's also like a thing of like, well, might as well have some fun while we're here, and I'm like, and that is with like human remains. That's where you go with that.
I also deeply loved that it's Paige mimicking Hamlet, like he's doing kind of lines from Hamlet, and
Yeah,
then Shakespeare's like, "You can't do that. That's bad luck." It's like, buddy, you wrote it. You have people on stage with skulls every time you perform the play, and that was also deeply funny to me. But this is also a good moment where we see that there's some strife happening between the bard and Page, which leads to Caliban seducing away Page to learn magics, even though our dear boy Shakespeare is just like empirically opposed to magic. This is kind of the first real glimpse we get at I think a deeper character where we see that he is like so afraid of magic because that is what
Yeah.
turned his parents.
I would argue this issue is really the only issue in which the two of them have deeper characters, which is why this is my
I
favorite
agree.
issue of the
I
series.
figured this is the one that you were going to be talking about.
Because
It's
we finally get like actual character dynamics and a little bit more depth to what's going
mhm,
on. And it still has funny gags. Like this first two we mentioned right here, we get Paige like barbecuing a chicken with a lightning bolt and it just turns into a fully cooked chicken. Like no feathers. And like that's like that I enjoy a lot of the sight gags in this issue,
mhm.
and we get character depth on top of that, which I feel like if this book had all the way through would have really, really allowed it to be at like a higher level.
Yes, fully agree. Um, but yeah, so he Paige becomes sort of a natural adept at magic. Uh, and get some food, which our dear Shakespeare refuses to eat on principle. So we're getting those really good character beats. We get that good character conflict between the two of them, where the like I mentioned before that this isn't a book where I'm worried about like someone dying, but it is a situation with stakes where it's like, oh, you are stranded on an island, you have to figure out how to survive, and so it did have that. The conflict here was really well done, and I think really believable in the universe of this book as well. Naturally, as was bound to happen, Caliban turns on the Page and tries to eat him, but Bard comes through and stops Caliban, and they learn to coexist on the island. Basically, we get what I don't think we get anywhere else in the book, which is a big old time skip. We've got a months later moment going on here. We can see that they have
The
grown
long, yeah.
absolute classic time skip vibes of Shakespeare now having a super long beard. Page's hair has grown out. I love that they still have their masks on. Um, and our good boy Caliban is just
Interesting.
kind of
Like I feel
lurking
like the
around.
masks, for whatever reason, somehow got bigger when they got longer hair. Like it feels like
I
it covers more of their
think
face.
they did. You know, the if you don't regularly shave your mask, it will grow. So
That's true.
you gotta
That's
be on
true.
top of that.
Yeah.
But we see a boat passing by, and while Bard is very excited to use this to their advantage to get off this island they've been stranded on, Paige is determined to stay on the island. Actually, so they have a squabble, a spat. They deal with a bit of a magic fight, which was super fun. We get a really fun illustration of Shakespeare breathing fire, which was super rad. I feel like this is another one. I wish that it was like more of a dominant space on the panel, so it could be another one of those like big cool art moments where it's like
I mean, what the first panel of it, which is like his beard turning to fire, is even
yeah,
covered up by an inset panel that like
which is such a
half
bummer
covers it. Yeah.
because it's really cool. I wanna see that sweet art. Um, but luckily the fire draws the boat near, and we learn that it's time to get off the island. Our dear boy Page is absolutely smitten by one of the boys on the boat, and so he's like, "Actually, I am fine to leave the island because I am in love now." They ask Caliban if he wants to come, and as Caliban is wont to do, he's like, "No, I would like to stay on my freaky little island, please. People will be mean to me." But we learn at the end here, as kind of is a theme with these one shots going forward. Of course, Puck was behind all of this. He was hoping that Shakespeare and Page would get hooked by magic, and they are now brimming with magical potential. But yeah, I think this was a really good issue. It stands out from the others in the same way that issue one does, where I feel like it really knew what it wanted to do, and because it was this one is the one that felt the most like kind of a just okay, we're gonna do the Tempest, but with this silly framework. Whereas a lot of the other ones feel like they're kind of like, yes, we'll do allusions to, and take little bits. But the Tempest is a
I think it
story that
also
is
like
really
the
easily
thing that the
adapted.
first
Yeah,
issue and this issue does that like the other ones don't fully do is it doesn't try to juggle multiple plot threads, which I
yeah,
think with how like dense this book is already, once
hmm
they try to intersect like multiple plot threads and you go in here and there, it's just a lot and it
yeah,
doesn't really allow them to like actually expand on or give depth to what they're doing. Whereas in the first issue, which was just that very clear story that they wanted to tell, and then
hmm
so one again, they kind of had a little story. They were like, okay, we're gonna have some tension here. We're gonna do the Tempest, and they it works.
yeah,
But then once they start trying to kind of, and I think it especially is evident in these back three. Once they
hmm
start really trying to put a lot into it, it starts getting really bogged down.
yeah, and again, deeply admire the commitment to the iambic pentameter, but it does make the writing in a little bulky,
Yeah,
which was really clean in this one because it was like you're saying so tightly focused on one character interactions, which is where bulky dialogue does a lot of good work, and two like really tense moments where it's like okay yeah I want these characters to be fighting, I want them to be using this wordplay against
essentially
each
only
other.
dealing with three characters for most
Yeah.
of it as well. Whereas like in a lot of these, we get scenes where there's like 5+ people all
hmm
speaking in iambic pentameter. It's like, oh, there's not space for that.
Right, yeah. Like there I truly think there could not be two more different mediums than a stage play and a comic book.
Oh
Cuz
yeah.
in a stage play, you have to repeat things so many times cuz you are banking on the fact that people are going to miss something somewhere. So it's a
There's no
lot of
flipping back, you know?
exactly, exactly. So everything has to be stated and stated again and stated like very clearly again and again. Whereas with a comic, it's like okay, we are also trying to get things done efficiently, so we cannot say
One
things
thing this
multiple
book isn't,
times.
it's efficient.
Yeah. But next up is the two gentle boys of Verona, which clearly is going to be our Romeo and Juliet moment. Before we can get back to London, we make a pit stop in Verona, where I was really excited at first when we started going through this, and it still worked by the end. But I really liked the idea of us operating in the background while the story of Romeo and Juliet is playing in the foreground. Where like, or I guess kind of the opposite of that. But like, so we are in the background of Romeo and Juliet, where like we're at the party and we know that they meet, and like Paige interacts with Juliet, but doesn't like talk to Romeo or anything. So this is our little plot is happening while we can understand what the plot is elsewhere. Um, but so the big thing in this one is this is a very Page focused issue where he has to deal with oh my goodness, what is his name? Proteus. Duh. He has to deal with Proteus, who is, womanizing with Juliet, and being homophobic towards Paige and Ferdinand. So they have a whole back and forth where Shakespeare's like, let me try to help the Capulets and the Montagues fix their feud. And Paige is like, I just want to impress this boy. And we focus much more on the let me impress this boy angle, which is cute. They're fine. Their interactions are written well enough. It's just not, super compelling most of the time because they just kind of
It's one of
like
those
each
things where
other
like, oh, this
immediately.
is like a fun plot beat, and then it becomes like a long
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, it went from a fun plot beat to a full issue.
Yeah.
um, because halfway through this issue, Bard is like, all right, we can't convince them. They have hatred in their hearts. Let's boogie. And this makes Bard. This makes Paige angry because he wants to stay and hang out with his new boyfriend, which he doesn't communicate to Shakespeare, which is a point of contention. We get Jay's favorite bit. We see the horse-drawn carriage. Oh, is it not? Why is it they end up in the forest? Interesting. I'm gonna ignore the waves there because I don't quite. Do you see what I'm talking about? There's a they're saying goodbye, and then it looks like waves come over. So I was like, oh, clearly that's the carriage going off into the water. But then we get to the carriage on a forest
Yeah, I
road.
think it's meant to communicate time. Um, like they went into the water and then they came out in the forest. Like I think is the like, or they came out and then they went into, like I think it's supposed to be like
Maybe so.
imply that,
Distance, yeah.
yeah, distances traveled. I
Hmm.
think that's another thing. Like there's some issues with the sequential sometimes where it's not always clear, especially when there's nonverbal like things that aren't also verbally being explained to you. It's not
Hmm.
always clear what's happening. And this is one of the ones where it's like, oh, there's like, wait, because like, and also there's a lot of stylistic stuff like thrown in pages and
Hmm.
panels a lot that like actually when I was reading this, I didn't even like think it clearly is Waves looking at it now, but I just kind of like thought it was that flair that's sometimes thrown in panels here where things kind of look melty.
Hmm.
A lot of times in the ghost panels and stuff, but I figured it was just like a thing, and I just moved on. But you're right; it clearly is meant to be Waves, which is interesting, and it does it help that like because there aren't a lot of backgrounds when we get the like long shot in the first panel here, it just kind of looks like they're on like tile,
Yeah.
like the the
Like
horse-drawn
cobble.
carriage. So it's not clear that they're like on a shore to then go
Hmm.
into the water.
Yeah, I think that the this artist really excelled with like the character moments and like character expressiveness and a lot of the kind of
Yeah, you get like
comedic
the cool emotion
drawing.
things. You get a lot of that like anime stuff where it's like, oh,
Hmm.
they shrink or their eyes get big or they turn into an egg. I don't think we've gotten to egg Shakespeare yet. There's an egg Shakespeare panel sometime, and it was very
Yes, I
funny to
don't think
me.
we hit it yet.
Yeah.
Um,
And those are fantastic, but just really sometimes the sequentials of it all is
mhm, is a little rough.
yeah.
But we are on the carriage. We are leaving Verona, and Paige expresses finally why he is sad, and Bard is like, okay, I understand why you're sad now. But before they can decide what to do, they are ambushed by, oh my goodness, why am I forgetting his name? Valentine. They are ambushed by Valentine and his his band of miscreants. Instead
The
of
bards.
a full fight, instead of a full fight, they again end up kind of talking their way out because they're both enemies of Proteus because Proteus got Valentine banished. And so they decide, actually, let's work together and let's go fuck up Proteus. Actually, so they turn around, they head back to Verona. We get the classic scene of Tybalt and Mercutio stabbing each other, which always a rip. Mercutio, my boy, how could you let Tybalt do this to you? And when our dear friends return, I'm skipping over a bit here because Romeo and Juliet do the plot of Romeo and Juliet. And when we return, they have already faked their deaths. They are being, marched through town, and Capulet has kind of learned his lesson. Shakespeare yells at Ferdinand's dad so that he and Paige can be gay together, and then Romeo wakes up. Classic Romeo. He thinks Juliet's actually dead, so he goes to kill himself. Luckily, Paige is there to do a bola save. There are a few little like cute lettering things in here where they'll like kind of explain what's happening with a little lettering just blurb. Uh, and I think that that's a cute way to express things because it's a little silly. It's a little silly to look at the bolas fly into frame. They're not like totally clear what's going on. So with stuff like that, and like earlier when Valentine and Paige shook hands, there was like a little blurb that was like understanding, and I'm like, okay, I can support this. This fits the tone of the book really well. Like these
There's also
kind of
ones for the fighting. I think there was like in that same. I think there was a low sweep one where the
mhm,
like SFX for where it was literally low sleep,
yeah,
low sweep.
and I think those added a really fun bit of personality to a lot of these moments. But naturally, with Romeo saved, Juliet wakes up, and they are together. They get admonished for trying to kill themselves, and then Paige's boyfriend punches Proteus. I'm sorry, I'm gonna change that. Paige's partner punches Proteus. Really hit that alliteration there. So they have their wonderful moment where they're like, "Oh, you stood up for yourself. Oh, it's because of your love." Uh, Bard supports them fully. Valentine arrives a little late, but they drag Proteus out to the forest, and Ferdinand's dad accepts him now, which is nice. Uh, this was a rough one, I will say. This issue, there was just
Yeah.
a lot going on, and I think it was a little roughly paced. And after the really good conflict between Bard and Page in The Tempest, it was rough to see the more I don't know, convenient conflict between them in this one. Uh,
It was it was slow. It was a little bogged down. The like intersection with Romeo and Juliet wasn't like great. Like it didn't really give you it. Like there was no real payoff. Like there's
mhm.
the punching, you know, like that punch is like your quote unquote. But there's no payoff that I went like, oh, this is like why we decided to intersect with Romeo and Juliet here. You
Yeah,
know?
yeah. And then the fact that Valentine didn't even really do anything, so it felt like the whole interaction with him wasn't particularly important. So I feel like the entire middle of this book was just unfortunately a bit of like not efficiently used time because we didn't get great characterization in that middle bit either.
The rough thing with a book like this, with the iambic pentameter, every page being so bogged down with dialogue, is like nothing's quick. So if you
Hmm.
take like a detail or you have a point of the book that's like a low point, it's not like a oh that was a couple pages and we're through it and who cares that that wasn't great. It's like no, you spent time with that,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you're like I don't know that I'm happy that that took up time here instead
yeah.
of something else that was more interesting or whatever.
Exactly. And I feel like if they had just stuck closer to the characters, like to Bard and Page, or even Page and Ferdinand, I feel like this could have been similar to the Tempest, where like, okay, we have Romeo and Juliet things happening, and we could even have an echoing of the Romeo and Juliet story with Page and Ferdinand or something. And that could have been a really good point of tension where it's like, oh, I want this to happen, but it's forbidden love. Like that's it's a classic for a reason, and
And
it
a classic like for a play based thing too. Like Forbidden Love is
yeah
such a like Shakespeare theatrical thing.
yeah, and the fact that the forbiddenness of it was just the like two instances of homophobia, I was like, okay, this isn't like super
Like easily
compelling.
gotten over too. Like it was like there was no like at least plot pushback, if
Exactly,
that makes
yeah.
sense.
uh like I feel like they could have leaned into, oh, we have to go back to London, and so like, oh, I don't want to go back to London, let me fake my death so I can stay here with you, or something like that. um
Yeah.
yeah, I think we just zoomed out a little too much in this
I
issue.
agree with you.
um but that takes us to issue 5. The Hark Knight returns. We have come back to London. Our dear boy Puck is up to no good again. Of course, he has dug up Richard III, so that his freaky zombie self can go and kill Queen Elizabeth, which is so rad. I loved the setup for this issue. I think that the Richard III zombie looked really great. I think that having this kind of like soft
Fucked up.
and sweet art style do this, like there's a millipede crawling through holes in this dead king's face. That's so cool. The way that they had him walk with like the completely hunched over posture was really really rad. I loved this setup going on here. Turns out, when after months of being away, Bard and also Shakespeare were gone. So London has gone a bit to shit, especially the theater scene.
Yeah.
Uh, the Globe is about to put on a production. Christopher Marlowe has taken Shakespeare's place, and no one has taken the Bard's place. And when this happens, everyone runs. Instead of flocking to the theater, they are fleeing from it. Shakespeare is incredibly incensed by this, naturally, because his beautiful theater is being used for evil, and uh, bad theater, which is worth,
Being used for evil
yeah.
and bad theater.
Which, frankly, I don't know which would be
He's
worse
a
for our boy Shakespeare the Bard.
little bad
Um,
theater.
Actually, I think I do know. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, Unfortunately, the powers of Kit Marlowe are too much. He has a zombie horde at his disposal. Paige is thrown into a dungeon while Shakespeare is captured. But Paige, luckily, has been thrown into a dungeon alongside Queen Elizabeth. Shakespeare is able to utilize his ingenuity using a pen to break his bonds and gets into a fist fight with Kit Marlowe. They have clearly some history going on, and a lot of a lot of very personal beef happening between the two of them, which I quite liked. Um, Queen Elizabeth is looking very Poison Ivy core,
I thought you
and
were gonna say she looks like what's her name? Whatever it is from Brave is what
very
I was
Merida
thinking.
core as well. Yeah. Here's the thing: media loves to put a redheaded woman in a green dress.
Yeah, yeah.
It just works. Um, They're like, let's make sure that Richard really doesn't like her. But we get the history that Richard came in and he overwhelmed the palace with the long dead king at the front of an army of zombies, and he snatched her crown, which is so cool. Like this bit of this issue is so rad to me. The interactions between Elizabeth and Richard are so cool because I think because I
Also
just
get
really
another
like the
like bigger
zombie.
moment panel with the Elizabeth
Mhm.
like reaction panel at one point, which is nice.
It is. It's so cool. Paige uses his magic to free himself and Elizabeth, and they are out to join the fight. Unfortunately for our boy Shakes, Puck has joined the battle, and he is using magic to capture Shakespeare. Richard gets to do a sick line with like the classic "and all that's foul is fair once more." That was so cool. I really like that. Every time Richard is on the page, I'm like, this is rad. We get to see how spooky he looks as they essentially are baiting Shakespeare into using his magic. They're trying to really put him into his back foot. His identity is revealed, as happens like all the time with these two. Their identities are constantly being revealed.
They're not
Uh,
great at the whole secret thing.
yeah. But then we get, I think, that cool page you were talking about where Richard is, monologuing, and Elizabeth gets to have like a really cool moment where she, kind of commands the show a bit, and they go in and attack, and it's great. Um, Kit Marlowe and Shakespeare have a little tit for tat going on, and our boy Puck actually directly is telling Shakespeare like, "Oh, you should use your magic. You should use your magic, dude." Doesn't work. Shakespeare uses a log, but then Paige and Elizabeth are being overwhelmed by a horde of zombies, and Shakespeare is finally forced to use his magic. We get another one of those really cool panels with despair and die as like zombies and ghosts surround Richard, and he is destroyed. Unfortunately, the zombies come too, and they are not thrilled that Shakespeare's used magic. So they're very much turning against him. Puck disappears into the fairy world, and not necessarily to escape the crowd of tomato throwers, but more so to actually finally catch Puck and get their revenge. The Bard and Page go to Fairyland. And that takes us to the end of number 4. This one is, I think that this was a pretty strong issue personally. I
Number
think that
five.
the,
Sorry, just quick.
or I'm sorry, you're right. I thought that this was a strong issue in some sections and then a bit boggy in others. Like, I think that the actual flow of Shakespeare's fight was really rough. Whereas I think that a lot of
I
the,
think
like,
the
mhm,
rough thing about this issue is that like it does a great job actually like setting up, building the tension, getting you there, and
mhm,
then I think this book's weakest thing is its action.
Yeah.
and this is an issue that's all about building up to the big action sequence. And when you get to that, and the action in the book just isn't good, it's just
It's
hard to
just
follow. Like you
it's
have
a
the log,
bummer.
like you mentioned the log thing, and it's like we kind of see him with the log, and then we see him like having hit. Like there's a lot of things with that, or like you just see a foot all of a sudden hitting something. Like there's
Mhm.
no real flow to the action of this book, which is
Yeah,
rough.
which is deeply a bummer. Because I do think that they do a good job with the build up and stuff. And the concept of this one I really, really liked,
I agree with you.
because I really liked the entire vibe of Richard, if that wasn't clear. But I also really liked what Elizabeth got to do. I feel like she had some cool energy. And I really liked the idea of, Bard and Shakespeare having a common enemy, and like that coming together for them as well.
Like the idea of like the build up to him having to use magic. Like I think
Hmm.
that's a great beat too. Like
Yeah,
it was set up well. It's just you
just
know
the execution was just, it was lacking, and it was so close to not, is like
yeah
the real bummer to me. Where like I could really see where this could have been a great issue, and it just didn't quite get there.
fully.
But we come to our final issue of No Holds Barred with Midsummer Night in the Garden of Good and Evil. I felt the need to say the name of all of the chapter titles because I love a good pun. But we
Funny
are
thing is, I think
in.
at some point I stopped reading the like act titles. So when you hit me with the Hark Night Returns, I was like, oh my god, that's what that one was called.
It sure is. But we are now in Fairyland. This is Puck's domain, and we're immediately outclassed. Puck is out magicking the bard and the page. He uses magic to compel Shakespeare to sit and listen as he, confronts him with his own trauma. As he's like, "Remember when I turned your parents into donkeys? That sucks. Do you want to know why I turned them into donkeys? Oh, because magic is the reason you're brilliant," which was really great. I loved that twist. Really turning Shakespeare's like one of the deeper character beats we have about him, which is his like resentment of magic, being like, "Oh, that evil is within you." I thought that was a really good character beat to set up. Paige immediately tries to, hype man Shakespeare up. He's like, Shakespeare's completely lost faith in himself. He's like, "All of my smarts come from magic, and all I am is my smarts, so I am nothing because I hate magic." Uh, we we get a glimpse at what Shakespeare's life would have been like if he didn't get the like blessings of intelligence and creativity, and it is like deeply funny to see such like a nice happy life, and Shakespeare being like, "No." Like we see him dancing with his wife. We see him chatting with Kit Marlowe, who's got the globe going on, and he's like, "This is the worst thing I've seen in my life," which I thought
And
was
we
a
get like
really
the most
funny.
rendered panel in this entire book too, when he's like popping out of the panel in like desperation and horror,
Yeah, back,
horror
terrible
and what his
fantasy
life would have
away.
been. And it's utterly hilarious that that's like the panel that was chosen to be the most rendered in this entire series.
I support it though. I support it. Like it's something where I feel like at the climax of this book they could have slipped away from their comedic sensibilities and like made it something really sad. But the fact that they're like, "No, what would be really funny while also being really true to this character?" And it's like, "Oh, a life where you're not famous. Like you're still happy, you're just not famous." And he's like, "This is the worst thing in the world." And I'm like, I think that was a really nicely chosen character beat there. But naturally, Paige is having none of this. He's like, "I don't care that your intelligence comes from magic, yada yada." Shakespeare isn't listening, so Paige hits him in the face with his lute, which phenomenal, great way to cheer up your friend. It works though, like in full ass works, which I also loved. I feel like Paige did kind of the things that you would expect to work, like the "No, I believe in you." He got to have a couple of moments of like, "Here's me saying very distinctly that you are great despite magic," and then it's hitting him in the face that actually ends up working. The power
Which
of
tracks.
Fairyland is kind of what you can do with your mind. So Shakespeare, knowing that he has a powerful mind because of magic, goes through a little magical girl transformation moment, and creates a world in which he is a massive knight in shining armor, quite literally. I cackled when I saw that his helmet goes up to his like deep baldness, which is such a funny idea.
Then the hair just it literally the hair just starts like it's still his head. It doesn't come from underneath. It doesn't like stop like it's just as if the mask has formed into Shakespeare's head.
It's so funny. Which also a great point to mention, when they've drawn Shakespeare as a little kid, he also has the like receded hairline thing,
Yeah.
which was one hilarious because it's on like a 2-year-old, and two is such a good character design beat to be like, yes, and this one is Shakespeare, and we know this.
It was very necessary. It was like because of the style of this book, like you need those things
Mhm.
to be your like, oh, this is who this character is.
Yeah, and I think building that in was super duper smart. Um, with all of this magic, he's finally able to stand up to Puck, who then channels his own huge bit of magic to also become this like behemoth giant. And they get into what I think is more of a wrestling match. As the wrestling boy, you can perhaps offer insight,
Yeah,
because the only reason I bring this up is because you told me when I said that the book was called No Holds
stationary
Barred.
wrestling like hold positions.
Hey, he throws him over his shoulder at one point. Kind of.
No, that's just him in
Is
a
that
different
not what's
position
happening?
after that, and it kind of looks like he threw him.
Oh, I just thought he threw him.
Like if you see, he's holding his leg there after it. He's
Oh,
just
you're
like bending
right.
his leg backwards though. That's not like
Interesting.
a. That's not a. Yeah.
In any case, we already kind of touched on the action on this book not always being our favorite thing,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
No, you're right.
Uh,
It is. It's like wrestling poses. I wish we got the Daniel Warren Johnson where we like see them doing a German suplex, a German suplex or something like that. Like that would have been very nice to see these two giant behemoths like German suplexing each other.
mhm.
Would have liked that.
Especially in a book that calls itself No Holds Barred. It's like I
Yeah,
feel
I
like
mean that
yeah,
fully wrestling reference right there. So
yeah. Um, but the demon is defeated, and by defeated I mean he says, "I submit, you win, Uncle Uncle," which
that was very funny.
was quite funny. I like that it didn't end with him like, I don't know, dissipating Puck, because it's like, okay, this feels in line with the tone of the book. Uh, and then everyone's like looking on with adoration, and Paige is like, "You did it, Bard! You fulfilled your revenge!" And it's very cheesy in like a clearly there's something more coming, because we've seen Oberon watching over, who is a much scarier force, as he comes out and is like immediately kicking Shakespeare's ass, even not in a giant form. He like dissipates all of Shakespeare's magic.
Did one of the
Um,
few bits of acting I did like Shakespeare like falling and then like making a hole in just like I don't know like it feels like a very like meta thing because he
yeah,
just like he hits like the blank backgrounds that this book usually has and breaks through it, and that I thought was very fun.
it was very funny. And unfortunately, Shakespeare is not deterred. He's like, I'm going to kill this demon, absolutely. So he plays a sweet song on his magically fixed lute, uh, which Titiana, Oberyn's wife, she hears from inside the castle. And lucky for Shakespeare that happens, because she comes out and tells Oberon to not kill him, and to send them back to London, so that he can, create great works that I believe, in her words, could inspire theater nerds. Um, which was a little silly, I'll say. That might have been a moment where the humor went a little too far, in my opinion, where I was like, okay, all right, let's calm ourselves down here. Uh, but
Yeah, I
Shakespeare,
think in these last couple of pages we had a couple. They do a few more like meta jokes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Which I guess, for like, I'm trying to think of the mindset of writing your final issue. I'm like, I guess I can see why you would plug a couple of those in at the end as like kind of a nice little nod to the theater nerds who maybe picked up the book because they're like, I love Shakespeare,
Yeah,
as opposed to comic nerds who picked up the book because they're like, I love comic books. But it's still
some
a little much for
intersection.
me.
I'm guessing that's who this is for. The
That's
intersection of,
fair.
yeah.
Very
But
fair.
yeah, yeah. I just in case you because I've derailed you here a little bit. There's also he also asks for like a favor here in case I don't
Yes,
know if you knew
yes.
that. Um,
Uh, Shakespeare's parents are transformed from their asses to themselves and immediately start making comments about him taking on a career as a writer. Uh, and like, oh, you'll never find a real job like that, buddy. Uh, and then we find that instead of being transported back to the Elizabethan era, there is a smartphone here, and we seem to be in modern day London. The Bard and Page are stranded in a future that they don't understand. Who knows what adventures will call to them here? But that's the end of the book, essentially. Uh, Jay, how did you
we
bronze?
get the bringing Shakespeare into the modern era joke because Shakespeare is literally
Yes, yeah.
in the modern era.
It
Um,
it is
yeah.
and the character who says it says, isn't that a little on the nose? uh
Yeah.
which is another one of those meta jokes where I'm like, okay, sure.
That was
um
the other one I was thinking of when I said that. I was like, yeah, that too. This
yeah.
feels like, and I mean, the book's only a couple years old, so maybe this feels like the setup for like a sequel book of Shakespeare
Hmm.
having adventures in the modern era. Like
Yeah,
that's the only reason I could think that they ended it like this because it doesn't feel
same.
like the end to the series is somehow him ending up in the modern era. Like there's no
Hmm.
setup for that being some sort of a payoff to anything. So it
Right,
fully feels like it's set up for a future
very
thing.
much so. But that is the end of what we have read. I think you said, is there another volume of it?
No, there's no other
Okay.
volume of it yet. It's only a few
uh
years old though. I think it came out in
2021, I
2022.
believe.
Oh, was
Maybe
it?
the TPB was 2022. um
It could have been 2021. I could be wrong. Uh,
in
in
any
which case, it's
case
a little bit. Yeah, it is 2021. You are correct. Um,
no modern adventures of Shakespeare yet. Uh, but Jay, in broad strokes, how'd you feel about No Holds Barred?
it's an interesting one to talk about because all the issues are very like, aside from the last two, are very like single issues,
Hmm.
and I think it's very up and down in that sense.
Yes.
Um, I think like my overview opinion of it is there are things that this team did very well, stuff like kind of the character stuff and intersecting with Shakespeare stuff, and then there were things that this team wasn't great at, building up to like big action climax and stuff. And I just wish that they had leaned more into what they were good at
Hmm.
instead of like having issues where they did kind of everything, and that meaning that some issues were weaker. Because like the fact that this book builds to big action climaxes, like I know that's how comics work, but when that's not what you guys are thriving at, I wish they had stuck with the humor and
Hmm.
the Shakespeare stuff because I think that
Yeah.
works so much better. I also like the iambic pentameter thing isn't fun for me. I don't like that. That's not a bad thing. I have never enjoyed reading Shakespeare for that reason, despite the fact that I like a lot of the Shakespeare stories.
Hmm.
So I kind of knew once I read that going into this, I was like, oh, that's going to be rough for me. If you're somebody who does enjoy things in iambic pentameter, I'm sure you'll love that. That's not like a bad thing. That's a me thing. And then the last thing is like the art is very good at the character beat moments, but
Hmm.
again, the sequentials of it can be rough at times, which makes it sometimes a little bit harder to follow. So you have to spend even more time on a page when you're already
Yeah.
spending a lot of time because the iambic pentameter. It ends up being a very like bogged down book at times. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's my high level review.
Yeah, I think I fall into a similar camp to you. I feel like for the first issue, I was like, oh, the iambic pentameter, that's like fun and impressive. Like, I love that as like a little writing exercise. And by the time we got to like issue 6, I'm like, okay, I don't need it anymore.
Do as
Like,
much
it
if you're not
was
binging it like we did.
exactly like I don't think it was a book that was really meant to be read
They're all
all at
basically single
once.
issues. It's
Yeah,
not really a yeah.
and I think the tough thing is that being the case, I think that the end of it was not as strong as like the single issues of it. Once they were like, okay, now we have to like connect our plot threads a bit more and like get to a series conclusion. Like, I don't know, I kind of wish that it had just continued being like kind of single issue adventures. Um,
Great. There's nothing wrong
because
with single issue
exactly, yeah,
adventures. Like there's very few books that do it now, but the ones that do can be really fun, you know?
yeah. But I quite liked I quite liked the characterization. I liked the way that a lot of the Shakespeare was worked in. I think that it was a little clunkier and sometimes other than others. Um, it was a really uh, it was a really strange read, which I think is it gets points for being very unique. We
It is
talk about this
incredibly.
all the time. Like when you're doing a big swing with something, you've immediately got my respect.
You get a
And
little bit more
even though I
leeway.
feel like the execution didn't always land as well as I would want it to, I think
Yeah.
that there were a couple of really great diamonds in there. I really liked issue 1. I really liked issue 3. I think that the characterization, uh, or not the characterization, but the character design for a couple of the villains, like Richard and the Hunter, were really, really great. I think that a lot of the
Fully.
concepts that they played with, the way that they brought the stories together was really fun. Um, but yeah, it was definitely a strange Saturday Super Show pick if there ever was one.
Absolutely. Um, at some point, I feel like we should start doing like I don't know, maybe like once a year check-ins where we just go like, what do we think the strangest books are in the Strange Saturday Super Show? Because this is certainly up there.
It's
Um,
certainly up there. I don't know that
but
anything
yeah,
can beat Sea Guy for me.
Sea Guy. Honestly, Space Riders I think is right there too. Space Riders
That's
and Sea Guy
fair.
were both acid trips
Yeah,
as comic books.
very much so. But yeah, this one earned its place in the Hall of Strange.
Absolutely did. It's honestly, I would be interested to see, especially like that were years removed. I'm sure that they've improved too. Like,
Mhm.
I would be interested to see what the New York Adventures look like.
Right? I want to know what the plan for the New York Adventures would be because you'd kind of lose the framing device of, you know,
Maybe like
Shakespeare's
Shakespeare,
plays.
Broadway. How the fuck's he dealing
They
with
do
that?
specifically talk about Broadway, and it's like, are
Yeah,
we going
yeah,
to see Shakespeare going on like a
yeah.
Wicked based
And
adventure? Is
honestly, if
Shakespeare
oh
going to
yes,
be in
please.
Guys and Dolls?
Honestly, it'd be really funny if like this was the entryway into like modern superhero universe. So, like this is just how the Bard becomes like one of like many superheroes.
I love the idea of there being like the Bard, the Witch, the. I was trying to think of a way to
It's
characterize
just in this
Alexander
world,
Hamilton.
everything comes from theater. Theater gives you
Yeah,
all your superheroes.
deeply funny concept.
Speaking.
And we'll keep an eye out to see if the sequel series
Yeah, unfortunately, I
comes
think
to
both these creators
pass.
have been pretty quiet, at least on any big stages, since this book. But
Mhm.
it'd be interesting
Was
to
that a little
see.
pun in there, Jaybird? A little pun in there on any big stages? Eh,
Yeah, yeah. I think
disgusting.
the artist recently did something for Dark Horse, like very recently.
Sweet.
There's time since then, but
Oh,
yeah.
before we close, I want to give big props to the colorist. I
I thought
loved
the
the
colors were
colors in this
phenomenal.
book. There was a really great color tone going on where I feel like everything felt so cohesive. There
Yeah, let me
weren't any
quickly.
like incredibly brash or bold colors, which I really loved. It gave it this kind of almost uh, kind of
Inez
soft kind of
Bravo.
yes, yeah, really great work. And I think that the coloring
Agreed.
style fit the art style of Carrie really, really well. Where, especially with the way that Carrie does their line work, where it's got kind of that pencil texture to it, and then having this soft, almost colored pencil-y uh, uh, coloring style was really a great match together. I think that they were a really good team together.
I fully agree with you. I think the coloring was
Yeah.
a big standout of this book, and
Yeah,
it really
big
helped
ups. I
with
just
the
want to make
tone.
sure I gave the props there because it was one of
Yeah,
the
full
things. It
shout.
was one of the first things that I talked about before we jumped on recording, where I was like, I
Yeah,
want
we
to
said
remember
very
to give
few
the
things.
colorist credit. Yeah.
Um, One of them being that the colorist was very good.
Yes. Yeah. But Jay, what else? What else is going on the Script Heroes channels
So yeah,
here?
well, we all last month we were ranking our top tens of various categories for 2024, including best issue. Best Series, Best Artist, and Best Writer. So you can check that out.
Mm-hmm.
We stream every Saturday, 9 to 11 Eastern, and our main episodes are every Wednesday on, it comes out about 6 p.m. Eastern, but that doesn't really matter. It comes out on Wednesdays. You can check out our full episode. But I believe that's all.
That's all we got for you. Stay
So,
strange.
we'll see you next week. Comic Geeks.